I'm Tanya. I'm an OpenSciEd teacher and facilitator, and today I'm here to chat with you about Lesson 2 of the Metabolic Reactions Unit. I love seeing my students' reaction to this lesson, and more importantly, the key ideas that they gain in this lesson will be revisited throughout the rest of the unit. Let's take a minute and remember what we did in Lesson 1 and the questions we had to help us get here. In Lesson 1, we learned about a girl named McKenna who's really sick, and we were wondering what could be causing her symptoms. We did notice a lot of her symptoms happened in the digestive system, and that led us to wondering what is happening inside of McKenna's digestive system. Now let's take a little closer look at the lesson at a glance. This is an investigation lesson that's 2 days long. There's about 30 minutes of required materials prep in advance, but this is not considered a hands-on investigation. It does require devices. And you'll be using a link to a simulation with your students, so you might want to check to make sure that link works for you and your students on your computers in advance. This lesson is a 2-day lesson, and there are 3 key moments to enhance coherence for students. As you move through this lesson, it seems as though we could break it down into 2 distinct chunks. The first happens on day 1, when the students get to use an interactive to see inside a healthy person's digestive system and McKenna's. From this, we figure out that McKenna's small intestine looks really different from a healthy person's, and we decide we need to investigate that further. This leads us to the second cluster, which happens on day 2. Here, the students dig deeper into what's happening in the small intestine of a healthy person versus McKenna by looking at some food data. We realize that in a healthy person, it appears as though a lot of the food molecules are decreasing, but not all of them. But in McKenna, the food isn't decreasing nearly as much. Her data looks really different. Now, we can say that by the end of this lesson, that the digestive system is made up of a bunch of organs, that McKenna's small intestine doesn't look the same as a healthy person's, and in a healthy person, there are many different types of food molecules decreasing as they go through the small intestine. But in McKenna's, the food molecules don't decrease as much. Let's slow down a little and dig deeper into 3 key moments that help us get to what we figured out. The first key moment happens in part 2 at the start of the lesson. Students are shown images of 4 parts of the digestive system. It's important to slow down and allow students time to understand the images shown on the right and how one picture is from the side and how the other is a cross-section. After looking at patterns found in the cross-section, students notice that they all look like tubes and they all seem to be connected. This leads students to asking if it's possible to send a camera down into her stomach and digestive system, which leads us right into part 3, which is analyzing endoscopy images. In part 3, which is about halfway through day 1, the students get to actually look at pictures comparing different parts of the digestive system. As they go through the images, they are recording their observations. As they are working on this, make sure to listen for students to start to notice that McKenna's small intestine looks really different from a healthy person's. There are some other differences that they may point out, but this is the big one that they'll need to be focusing on moving forward. As a tip, definitely set a timer for this part. This is one place where they'll want to look at every single little detail, but as long as they get to the fact that the small intestine doesn't look the same, that is what they'll need to move forward with their own sense making. Also, I've had students that could not tolerate looking at some of these images in the past. I would suggest having a plan for your students in advance when they simply can't tolerate looking at the images, and then once you're done with that section, have them return to the classroom and use the data collected from their classmates to move their thinking forward without actually having to look at them. Then on day 2, we analyze data using the Identify and Interpret strategy, also known as the I2 strategy. Here, first, students identify what they see in data. It could be as simple as there's 2 different colors, green and orange, to something more detailed, like McKenna has more glucose in the middle of her small intestine than a healthy person. This process helps students break down what they can see in data and makes it less intimidating. Then they shift to determining it to what it means. And they try to explain their observations and identify areas where they need more evidence or have questions. This is initially done independently or in small groups, then transitions to whole group or scientist circle for a sense-making discussion. From this part, they'll notice 2 things. First, that in a healthy person, the amount of food molecules meaning the green lines, are decreasing between the start of the small intestine and the middle of the small intestine. And second, that McKenna's data does not match a healthy person, and she has a lot of leftover food. So where do we go from here? This brings us to the end of the lesson on day 2. Your students are now super curious because in past units they learned matter can't simply disappear. It must be going somewhere. But in our data, that's what looks like is happening. So next we'll want to explore where these food molecules might be going. Let's take a minute and revisit some of these tips and tricks. My first suggestion for this lesson is to really take the time to use the I2 strategy and allow students time to identify what they can see in this data and try to explain it in their own words. The data is different than most bar graphs that they've probably been asked to look at in the past, and this type of data will be revisited in future lessons. Identifying where the legend is and how the scale works will help them when they see this again. And I know that I mentioned this before, but definitely have a plan for students that may not be able to look at or talk about some of the things that are seen in the endoscopy images because they might not be able to handle that. In terms of word wall management, there is a word that we earn, which is organ, which is considered a structure inside the body. But do know this definition will build over time, and right now that's currently our working definition. So we'll keep adding to it as we get more and more information. There are several words that we encounter, and one that I found my students started to use at this point and wanted to add would have been the word absorption. Now, it's up to you whether you want to add the word yet or not, but do know that is one of the words that we earn in the next lesson. In terms of poster management, you may wish to refer back to your driving question board and your initial model at some points throughout the lesson, so having them available is always helpful. The materials that are created during this lesson include the Analyzing Endoscopy Images data table handout that your students will complete while they're looking through the simulation, and there aren't any really large posters that are created that are going to be revisited again in future lessons. Thanks so much for taking the time to walk through Lesson 2 with me. This lesson sets us right up for Lesson 3, which will be our first hands-on investigation for the unit. Hope you have a great day.